Hello and welcome to KringleCon. I want to show just a tremendous amount of respect and gratitude to Santa Claus for having me out here. It was fantastic to get me up to the balmy North Pole from the hinterlands of South Dakota. So it's great to get away and have a slight vacation. And I want to spend a little bit of time and talk about cloud security assessments and why cloud security assessments and the way we look at the cloud is fundamentally important and transformative to the way that we're going to be handling network penetration testing, especially over the next 5 to 10 years. So we're going to dive right in. Now, this particular section, this particular presentation goes really well with Bo's presentation about password spraying, everything you wanted to know but was afraid to ask, and I want to continue that as well. So we're going to dive in and we're going to talk about creds. Credentials are absolutely key for any kind of online cloud-based attack that you're going to be doing. The reason why is it pretty much drives everything. And once you gain access to one service with credentials, usually you then gain access to a large number of additional services. So a good example of that would be if you're looking at Microsoft Azure. Once you're able to authenticate and you're in one port, once you're a G and you can move over to all the other services. And the same is also true whenever you look at Google, you look at Gmail, you look at Google Apps domains. A lot of third-party software from GitHub all the way over to Twitter to let's just say Trello, anything, all tie into that Google authentication. So once you've authenticated successfully into Google, then you can then move laterally to a large number of additional applications as well. So we have a tremendous amount of luck at Black Hills Information Security in actually doing this level of password spraying. And we want to throw out a special thanks to Microsoft and Google. And why does this matter so much? Well, this is an attack that's been in the OWASP top 10 for pretty much since the inception. If we can differentiate whenever we send in a request to an authentication portal between valid credentials and invalid credentials, it makes it exceedingly easy for us to automate this, as you can see in the lower right-hand corner, to quickly identify what are valid accounts and which ones are invalid accounts. And yes, even if you have two-factor authentication, many web portals, many cloud-based services, you'll see a timing difference between a valid set of credentials and an invalid set of credentials, or sometimes it'll just come straight back and tell you, hey, you've successfully authenticated with the user ID and password. Now it's time for your 2FA. And we can use that to harvest those user IDs and we can harvest those passwords. Also, there's additional problems that exist in cloud infrastructure. This is a problem that was discovered by Mike Felch and Bo Bullock, where you could actually submit basic email, not necessarily email, you could send in requests to someone's calendar and you could send in hundreds of them and they would show up on people's calendar and they would basically pop in without the user ever clicking a link or accepting it, and it would just flood their inbox. Further, you could even send in additional requests that you could accept those calendar invites as well. So we use this often in spear phishing assessments. So we'll send in a calendar invite basically saying, hey, super important meeting at the North Pole, KringleCon, you've got to be there, and it'll show up on your calendar. 10 minutes before it starts, you get this pop-up, and it says, hey, you've got this really super important meeting that you've got to be at the North Pole for, but before you go to this meeting, you're gonna need to review these documents. And then once they click the link, then we can start trying to harvest those credentials. Now, the tool behind this is called Cred Sniper. Now, there's a number of tools that actually do this, but we're partial to it because it's written by our very own Bo Bullock and Mike Felch. And what this does is proxy that authentication between the user who's trying to access a resource or thinks that they're accessing a resource that is at Google, and then Google itself. It's kind of a man-in-the-middle framework for authentication. So whenever the user clicks that link, it actually harvests their images from Picasa, their picture, whatever their profile picture is from their corporation or their personal profile, whatever, pops it up, and it looks just like Google's authentication. It asks you for your email. It also asks you for your password, and then it asks you for your two-factor authentication. Now, while you're putting in all of that information, the two-factor authentication, while you're putting in the information with the user ID and password, the Mail Sniper tool in the background is actually going to Google and authenticating. So it's forwarding all of that information onto Google and then logging in. Once it logs into Google, it automatically has the capability to generate an app password that doesn't require two-factor authentication, automatically puts in a filter that will filter out any security warnings from Google, and it pretty much gives you full access to their files in the back end. So if we're trying to simplify what this is, because this particular picture looks kind of complicated, you have lots of lines and it's a flow chart, and I hate flow charts, and then you got wires in the network operations center closet, and that just looks scary. Let's boil it down. It sets up a phishing server, captures two-factor, has the ability to bypass U2FA as well, suppresses all Google security messages, creates an app password, and then allows you to pillage. And everything is connected in your world to Google, pretty much absolutely everything. So this is an easy tool, and it should serve as kind of a framework for your cloud security pen testing adventures. Look at how authentication actually works. How does the API work? When you're looking at almost any authentication portal, it has the ability to authenticate once through like a single sign-on, and then you can reuse that authentication again and again and again in a wide variety of different services that are provided. So go out and get CredSniper. We absolutely love it. We provided the links here, and a much longer presentation by Bo and Mike covering this. Also, a very special heads up, please, please, please be careful. Google does not like this. Now, we're just using Google as an example. You can also do OA and a number of other portals using these exact same types of techniques, but by and large, you're violating terms of service. Now, is it illegal? That's debatable. If you have full authentication and authorization in the form of a contract to do a pen test against a company, and you're hired to replicate what an attacker will do against that company, this falls in the category of what evil people would do to try to break into those organizations. Now, do you want to anger Google? Generally, no. If they ban you, your family, your pets, and block your IP addresses and send Deadpool after you, that could all be a very bad thing. So please be careful. So what have we learned when we're talking about trying to be careful? Well, we've learned that if you try to go up directly against Dino Shark, or if you try to go up against Sharktopus, in almost all of these movies, there's a scene where the hero or hero wannabe or a villain tries to stand up to these horrible, horrible monsters and then gets eaten. And what we have discovered all the way back to the Godzilla movies and Mothra and Mechagodzilla is the best thing you can do with monsters is to actually turn them against each other. And that's what we recommend here. So this is KringleCon. What KringleCon allows you to do is password spray using Amazon Lambda. Now, why would you actually want to do this? Well, let's use an example. Let's say that Amazon is Dino Shark and you're trying to break into Google, which is Sharktopus. Well, you can't attack Sharktopus directly. Why don't you use Dino Shark, i.e. Amazon, to actually password spray against Google or Sharktopus? And that's exactly what the KringleCon tool will allow you to do. You do that spray, you spray against Google, and it appears to be coming from Amazon Lambda. And the reason why this works is because by and large, these very, very large corporations, I don't want to say that they trust each other because there's, I'm sure, seething levels of hatred between these companies, but they know if they all of a sudden start blocking and blacklisting IP addresses from Amazon Lambda, that they're going to start degrading the capabilities for their customers to do their work, because these large cloud service providers are integrated with each other. So by turning them against each other, we now have the ability to do spraying pretty much at will without really worrying too much about getting eaten by Sharktopus or the Dino Shark. And I honestly believe that not getting eaten by Sharktopus, Dino Shark, or honestly polar bears, do be careful if you go outside. Just there's polar bears out there, so be careful. That's just a bad day. Also, the point is, many people in computer security who really don't understand network penetration testing, and people that fundamentally do not understand what it takes to actually break into an organization, they believe that everything in computer security is all about 0 days. What are the exploits that can be leveraged to attack a remote service? You know, if you talk about the government, well, we needed a 0 day to get into this guy's iPhone. Not necessarily, because if you're looking at devices like iPhones, this also fits into the cloud security model as well. If you look at iPhones and Android devices, these devices pretty much sync absolutely everything up in the cloud. All of their contacts, all of their emails, all of their files, their pictures, everything gets synced up to the cloud. So if you're trying to break into that device, it's kind of unnecessary, and it kind of defeats the principle of what you're trying to do when you're doing a pen test or doing an attack against an organization. You're not necessarily after getting root or shell. You're after the data that you can get after you get root or shell. And always keep that in mind, because if you ever have somebody, anybody in the community that thinks that all of penetration testing is nothing but exploits, they truly, at a very deep level, do not know what they're talking about. However, if we flip that over, if somebody's password is furries forever, even if they have two-factor authentication, we can still get access to the exact same data. So when you're pen testing, when you're doing cyber offensive operation, never ever lose sight of what the end objective is, number one. And number two, never ever lose sight of the easiest way to try to gain access to those data, to that data set as well. So what then? A number of additional tools that are fantastic. If you want to bypass OA two-factor authentication, enter MailSniper. Once again, a tool that's created by Bo Bolick. And what this tool allows you to do is it allows you to bypass that two-factor authentication, which is great. But the thing that's the most important here for me is it gives you, the tester, the ability to actually search through the email of that user or that particular organization. Why is that an important point? Well, this is an incredibly important point because it articulates that when you're attacking cloud-based infrastructure, sometimes gaining access to just a single account is enough to crack that door open and then gain access to a whole bunch of additional data. Let me explain. So many organizations, you'll have very important people. And what they'll do is they'll delegate access to their inbox to somebody else. And whenever they delegate that access to the lower level person in the organization to actually check their email, validate their email, tell them what email is actually important, they mess up. And they'll say that we're going to open up my, I'm going to open up my inbox to everybody. MailSniper has the capability of finding those inboxes where people have over-delegated the responsibility of their inbox to not just a particular person, but to the entire organization. And then you can search through those emails as well. It is absolutely phenomenal. And the reason why this is important, I think, for everybody that's listening to this is all of us are doing cyber offensive operations. We're spending a lot of time gaining access to the endpoint. We're writing malware, we're gaining access, we're pivoting, we're using Bloodhound, we're using PowerShell Empire, but here's the trick. A lot of those tools as of right now are being detected by many advanced security products, be it endpoint security products like CrowdStrike or Cylance or Carbon Black, or they're being detected through user behavioral and entity analytics like Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics or whatever Rapid7 is calling their product, after they changed the name a number of times. But the point is, there's a lot of technologies that are detecting the exact same pathways that we're using again and again and again. What's beautiful about MailSniper is it allows you to kind of sidestep that ability to be detected by a number of those different products by looking through email. And email is not really looked at as important by many of the security products as files on servers or domain authentication, but it is incredibly valuable. If you think about it, almost anything that has any value to your organization is going to be sent in an email, and MailSniper gives you the ability to actually go through and search through that email. And this ties in once again with the idea of cloud-based attacks. Once you gain access, what other APIs, what other avenues can you use to try to gain access to that sensitive data that would exist in an organization? Once again, all of those super elite people that talk about 0 days, they truly do not understand how to break into organizations. They just don't. They've got a cool trick. They break into systems, they write 0 days, and trust me, that's neat. But honestly, this is the stuff that's going to create the highest risk profile for an organization because their sensitive data is in fact in the emails. So Azure, what are some additional things that you can do? We've been doing a lot of research on the Azure platform. And with Azure, you can harvest from the internet users, groups, group membership, service principal names, applications, and you can also add guest user accounts, which is weird. All of this with a standard user account. So this is just the result of 1 week of research by a couple of people at the HIS, Mike and Bo, and they were able to pull down just an amazing attack surface for Azure. 1 week. So this means for everybody that's like listening to this right now here at the North Pole at Santa's Castle, if you're trying to make a name for yourself in computer security, if you're trying to get out there and you're trying to make an impact to computer security, you can go down that exact same path as everyone else, endpoint security bypass. You can try to learn how to write 0 days and impress the other wizards, who generally are not people that are impressible under normal circumstances. Or you can look at these huge green fields of all these different cloud-based APIs, and there's amazing things that can be learned. And it's not necessarily about hacking or getting shell, but understand what interfaces are created for administrators and how those administrative interfaces can be used. Further, what can you access as a standard user? And then you start to see how this ties together. Standard user account, password spray, or spearfish gain access to an API on the cloud with a standard user, and then how can you leverage that to gain additional access to the rest of the environment? Final section, the browser is the new endpoint. With Outlook add-ins, we have the ability to get creds, log into Office 365, add an add-in, sync everywhere. And what's cool about this is with these add-ins and with these plugins, you can do things like add a beef hook, harvest creds, all kinds of fun things that you can do. And if you want kind of a conceptual framework on why we should be looking at this, look at something like Grammarly. Grammarly checks all of your spelling constantly, checks your overall grammar of sentence. It is literally a keylogger in your browser. And it doesn't take anyone with a little bit of background of experience for any development to really work all that hard to create a plugin that would do something similar. Also, LastPass. LastPass monitors absolutely every page and every form that you go into to provide you with a password or suggest for you a password for that particular page. So let's start looking at the browser a lot more. So all of this matters. When you're looking at these attacks, they are no longer straightforward attacks. They require a bit of setup. They require an architecture. And this is important because this field, looking at the cloud, is not going away. Josh Wright has this fantastic quote that he had a number of years ago, where he was discussing that most vendors do not want to patch a vulnerability until a Metasploit exploit has been released. And then, and only then, will they patch it. These particular vulnerabilities and attacks that we're talking about, they aren't exactly Metasploitable style attacks. So they're probably not going to be patched. If they're not going to be patched, it means that we're going to be able to attack them for a good long time. So I want to say thank you very much. Let's start taking apart the cloud. Silence is all about failing and taking notes. So don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to learn as much as you possibly can about all these crazy APIs. Just get out there. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great time here at the North Pole.